The H hour by which all actions must commence had been fixed for 0200 hours, January 15th, 1966. The officer who was to execute the plan in Enugu and Benin had left Lagos on the 13th and had only to be notified to carry on within the early hours of the 15th. The officer who was to operate in Ibadan was based at Abeokuta. He too was a relatively young officer, although he was commanding his own unit, which was the 2 Field Battery, a unit under the command of 2nd Brigade. Captain Nwobosi had reported to Lagos early on 14th and obtained written orders from Ifeajuna, commanding him to carry out the Ibadan operation. Again, this did not follow the laid-down procedure but served as a cover. Nwobosi returned to Abeokuta before nightfall. His own unit, which was newly formed, had no transport. Therefore, he went to the 2nd Reconnaissance Squadron in the same barracks. Pretending that he had a genuine message from Major Obienu, the squadron commander, he told the squadron captain, Remawa, to supply him with a Land Rover and a 3-ton truck. The latter did. Before midnight, Nwobosi and his second-in-command were ready to move with about 25 of their batterymen. At midnight, Nwobosi was waiting by the telephone to receive the final order from Lagos to move. At about 2300 hours, a group of officers were assembled at the military quarters of Major Ifeajuna at Apapa. These included the officers who took part in the planning of the coup, namely Ifeajuna, Anoforo, Okafo, Chukwuka, and myself. With us were a number of young officers, captains, and subalterns who had only just been summoned from the officers' mess for the operations. Not more than 2 of them had previous knowledge of the operation. One of these was a staff officer working with Ifeajuna, and the other was a subaltern working with Major Okafo. 2 officers were conspicuously absent from the gathering. One was Major Obienu, commander of the 2nd Reconnaissance Squadron based at Abeokuta. He had been briefed well in advance and was supposed to attend this gathering so that after the address he would proceed to Abeokuta to bring his armored vehicles to back up our Lagos operation. It was thought that he might yet turn up, and we kept our expectation of him alive. The other was the young captain who at the first light of day was to fly in a special plane to Calabar to effect the release of Chief Awolowo. He too had not turned up, and we expected that he would do so later. We were all addressed by Ifeajuna, who highlighted the political situation in the Federation, pointing out that the politicians had failed the people. In effect, there was nothing to follow the political chaos except the disintegration of the country, unless there were men of goodwill who would rally round to fight for the survival of their country. Now that the moment of action had come, it was essential for those called upon to rise to the occasion. The response of the young officers was enthusiastic and almost unanimous. Only one captain asked to be excused, but he was soon persuaded to stay. After this, officers were allocated to their various duties. Major Ifeajuna and 2 subalterns were to arrest the Prime Minister, Sir Abubakar, and the Federal Minister for Finance, Chief Okoti Ebo. Major Anoforo and 1 subaltern were to arrest Colonel K. Mohammed and Lieutenant Colonel Unegbe. Major Okafo, 1 captain, and a subaltern were assigned to arrest Major General Ironsi and Brigadier Mai Malari. Major Chukwuka and a subaltern were to arrest Lieutenant Colonel Pam. Major Ademoyega, a captain, and 3 subalterns were to occupy and control all strategic locations of the federal capital, including the control room at Lion Building, the police headquarters, the P&T telephone exchange, Parliament Building, and the Nigerian External Communications Operations Room, and the Nigerian Broadcasting Corporation (NBC). This group was also to set up roadblocks at the strategic locations, and Major Ademoyega was to make the early morning broadcast over the NBC. As soon as the duties were allotted, we all moved to the 2nd Brigade headquarters, where troops were called out and ordered to get into their combat suits and bear their arms for internal security operations. At the same time, Abeokuta was contacted by telephone and Nwobosi was ordered to go ahead. A signal was sent to Enugu ordering Oguchi also to go ahead. Arms and ammunition were issued to officers and men from the brigade headquarters armory. For transports, Land Rovers and trade tunnels were laid out and shared between the groups. Those who had no military transports were to use their personal cars. At 0200 hours, we dispersed to carry out our various duties. We were to reassemble after our initial task had been completed at the Federal Guards Officers' Mess, Dodam Barracks, so as to review our successes and reallocate duties for the second phase. The second phase had previously been arranged as follows. A. The completion of any uncompleted task of Phase 1. B. The occupation and control of the various military units in Lagos, including the Army headquarters, to effect a favorable disposition of all troops. C. Immediate link-up with the outstations Abeokuta, Kaduna, Ibadan, and Enugu. D. The control of the airport. And E. The initial broadcast over the network of the NBC. I took my own group straight to the P&T exchange with a view to cutting off any use of the telephones. I ordered those at the control room to stop forthwith to link up callers, and they did. But the automatic system was not easy to put out of action. I ordered the workers to take me to the switchgear, but they led me to the basement of the building and showed me that it was not accessible to them. Therefore, I ordered the technicians to start the manual disconnection of the automatic linkages. They obeyed under the watchful supervision of a subaltern and a few of the junior ranks. Next, I was at the Lion Building, at both the security desk on the ground floor and the control room upstairs. I told the officers and men on duty that the army was engaged on special operations. I ordered them not to receive or transmit messages by radio or telephone, and I instructed a subaltern and some men to see that my orders were carried out. After that, I was at the net and I went straight to the officer in charge and ordered him to stop receiving and transmitting any message whatsoever. He obeyed. I then detailed the subaltern and some junior ranks to take charge and see that my orders remained effective. I drove straight to the NBC, which was yet closed down. It was at 0320 hours. I posted a few other ranks under the command of a sergeant to the station to hold the ground until I had returned much later to make a broadcast on the events. After that, I posted a few other ranks to the Parliament building. I also ordered roadblocks to be set up as strategic positions on the two main exits from Lagos to Ojota via Maryland and Lagos to Agege via Mushin. After this, I was at the Federal Guards Officers' Mess, Ikoyi. Close to my heels came Major Emmanuel group. They had accomplished their own task, having arrested Colonel K. Mohammed. Lieutenant Colonel Onegbe had resisted arrest, and in the scuffle he had been shot. Next came Major Chukwuka's group. They had accomplished their own task also, having arrested Lieutenant Colonel Pam. After them came Ifeajuna's group. They too accomplished their task, having arrested the Prime Minister and the Federal Finance Minister. In addition, as they were returning to base, they saw Brigadier Mai Malari escaping from the attempt of the Okafor's group to arrest him. They wanted to arrest him, but in the scuffle, he was shot. I went out to look for Okafor's group. I met Okafor himself coming from the Federal Guards Barracks. "What has happened to you, and what have you achieved?" I shouted at him. "I have just lost my command," Okafor said slowly. The news sent cold sweat through my spine. I almost shivered. "Oh no, what have you done wrong? What's all this about?" I spoke to my RSM just now and he nearly shot me. He said the GOC had been to the barracks. "I did not meet him there," explained Okafor. "What? Did he escape from you?" I asked. "I went to his house to arrest him. I found that he was not there. He had not yet returned from the party." "Which party?" I asked. Everybody had left the party since 9 last night. "No, it was another party. He had been to another party after my Malari's party. Now he had been in here. He commanded the troops not to take orders from me and none of them would obey me now. In fact, they were ready to shoot me." It was shocking. It was horrible. If we could no longer use the Federal Guards, what troops could we use? Where were the men? Which was the force to rely upon? "Why was it that your own group did not achieve anything?" I asked Okafor. No answer. I returned to the main group at the officers' mess. Okafor came along with his bad news that General Ironsi had not been found at home when he went there. He was said to have gone to another party after my malaries. But he had since surfaced at the Dodon barracks and succeeded in raising troops against us, claiming that he did not know what was happening. After that, he was said to have driven to the 2nd Battalion barracks at Ikeja to raise more troops against us. Yet, none of the other group had seen him to accost and arrest him. The news of Ironsi's escape came to a shock to all of us. If the federal guards were already made hostile, then the officers' mess was no longer tenable to us. It could no longer be used as our tactical headquarters. What was our answer to this new development? There were only 2 possible safety valves. 1. We had many roadblocks inside the city. If Ironsi had got into the hands of our own troops, they would have to arrest him. 2. If Major Obienu had reported at the outskirts of the town as he was previously ordered, he would have been available for us for a fight against Ironsi. Since Obienu did not turn up at all on January 14th to confirm his preparedness for action, we were not sure whether or not he had turned up with his squadron. It would have been a good thing if he had come. We needed to link up with him. The rendezvous had been previously fixed at Airport Junction on Abeokuta Road. At this juncture, it became totally untactical to keep carrying the arrested military officers with us. For one thing, they too were highly skilled military tacticians and could turn the situation to their own advantage. For another, the situation had become somewhat slippery and we needed to be on our toes. It was at this moment that those officers were taken away and shot. It was also at this point that Lieutenant Colonel Lagama, who had only arrived in Lagos late on the 14th, bringing down Sardauna's last message on the walloping of the West, was arrested and shot. After all this, Ifeajuna, Okafor, and a few young officers left the officers' mess for the place of our scheduled rendezvous. They still had the arrested Prime Minister with them. They were soon followed by Anoforo, who carried a few young officers with him in 2 private cars. Chukwuka followed in a Land Rover. He too had some young officers with him. I trailed behind them in the Land Rover, followed by a 3-tonner. I had some young officers and many soldiers in the 3-tonner. The bodies of the fallen officers were there, and so also was the arrested Federal Finance Minister. As we drove to the township, I asked at the checkpoints if Ironsi had been sighted. The first was at the Idumota approach to the old Kata Bridge. Yes, indeed. They had seen this staff car when they were just setting up the roadblock. It had driven off without being checked. At that account, he had passed the place soon after 3 o'clock. He had had a full hour to have settled himself at the 2nd Battalion location. If nobody had stopped him, other roadblocks had not seen him at all. Soon, I was at the rendezvous at Agege Motor Road at the Airport Junction. Anoforo's group were there. No ferrets from Abeokuta, no trace of Ifeajuna's group. Chukwuka's group had not come. Why? Ifeajuna was driving ahead of Anoforo and did not seem to have stopped at all at the rendezvous. Anoforo had sent an officer to the gate of the Ikeja cantonment. There were no signs of the ferrets or Ifeajuna's group. But the 2nd Battalion had been roused by Ironsi and they were already holding the gate in full strength. It became obvious that Major Obienu had defaulted altogether. Even then, where now was Ifeajuna? He could not be waiting for us further out of town, explained Anoforo. We waited a while to be sure. Then we drove off in a convoy along Abeokuta Road, past Agege and past Ota. Still, there were no trace of Ifeajuna or Obienu. Even Chukwuka had not caught up with us. We halted. I conferred with Anoforo. Had we now lost Lagos? Had our own men deserted us? Okafor had lost the Federal Guards. Has Ifeajuna also lost the 2nd Brigade headquarters? Has Obienu lost the 2nd Reconnaissance Squadron? Where were we heading to? We were now at the horn of a dilemma. It was Anoforo who came up with the notion that even if Obienu were not to be found in Abeokuta, we could still get his squadron for our use. In that case, why didn't we drive down to Abeokuta? And if Obienu was there, we might persuade him to come with us. I agreed. We drove off in a convoy of 2 cars, 1 Land Rover and 1 3-tonner towards Abeokuta. Midway, I halted Anoforo because of the cargo of corpses in the 3-tonner. it will be inexpedient to carry that to town. It was already 5 a.m. Hence, some young officers and men were deployed as to prevent vehicles from either directions reaching our location. Then I ordered the cops brought down and taken into the bush. The arrested finance minister was still in the truck, and it was no longer expedient to carry him around with us. As such, he was taken to the bush and shot. Since there were no digging implements, a few soldiers were detailed to remain there on guard till digging implements were brought to bury the bodies. The convoy moved again. It was 6:30 in the morning when we made Abeokuta barracks. Obienu was not around. He had not returned from the station since the previous day and left no orders for troop deployment. Anoforo used his former position to get troops mobilized without waiting for a formal order from their own commander or from the brigade headquarters in Apapa. We now had a troop consisting of 4 ferrets in our hands, and we were ready to return to Lagos for further action against Ironsi. While the ferrets got ready, some young officers left with digging implements to the site of the corpses and organized their burials. They were then waited nearby till we arrived, and together we drove to Lagos. The cars were in front, the ferrets followed. The Land Rovers and tree turners were behind. Anoforo and I rode in the ferrets, each of us commanding a pair of them. There was one squadron officer with us, a subaltern. He was in one of the ferrets. A convoy movement was never the fastest thing in the world. It was about 11 o'clock before we made Lagos. Now there were more roadblocks, all loyal to Ironsi, with orders to arrest unfriendly forces. Who in fact were unfriendly forces? There was no clear definition. News soon reached us that some of our officers had been arrested. So what was our immediate mission? This was quite clear to us: to get Ironsi. But now that we were in Lagos, where exactly was Ironsi? Some said Ikeja, some said he had passed through Apapa, yet others said he had returned to Ikoyi. We made straight for Ikoyi, while the young officers in the cars were sent around to bring us news. Soon we were in Ikoyi. I observed that the NBC was now occupied in bigger strength. I approached the gate and was told that a certain broadcast had been made in the morning and that since then nobody had been allowed to go in. The GOC was not around either. A little further away, there was new troop at the entrance of the officers' mess. The troops had orders not to allow anybody to go in. But again, the GOC was not there and had not been seen around. Once more, I conferred with Anoforo. We considered the effect of shooting our way into the NBC to make a broadcast to the nation that the army had taken over. This would immediately bring about an open clash between us and the reactionary forces of Ironsi. The only objection to this was that we did not have revolutionary troops with us, and it would therefore be unwise to start an open fight. On the other hand, we could not contact Kaduna or Enugu since we had no access to army signals network and the public telephones had been disrupted. We decided at once to leave Lagos for Ironsi. It was quicker to make Enugu than Kaduna from Lagos. As such, we decided to drive to Enugu in the ferrets so that if our own troops had been successful there, we could contact Kaduna. Now it was already midday. Ironsi was not yet located, but it was known that he had summoned troops from Ibadan. No news about Enugu and no news about Kaduna. The young officers who were formerly with us were now flung afield. Some still fished for news for us, some were back in their units, and others had already been arrested by troops loyal to Ironsi. Most of what we knew were heard by interrogating the troops around the NBC and Federal Guards officers' mess. They freely answered our questions, assuming that we were on Ironsi's side because we simply sat on the ferrets as if newly summoned from another station. Nevertheless, these troops held their ground firmly. If we tried to enter into any of the positions or into any military barracks whatever, we would have had to shoot our way in. The situation became highly explosive. Any move that was contrary to the orders of Ironsi would have sparked off a bloody fight.
My main concern is to restore law and order as soon as possible.
At this juncture, I led a troop of only 4 ferrets and we drove from Ikoyi through Ebutemeta and Ikorodu Road. After the Maryland Junction, there was a heavy roadblock. Again, as if we were troops summoned by Ronsi, we were allowed to pass and we drove towards Ikorodu. Soon after passing the Maijudum Bridge, we met troops of the 4th Battalion from Ibadan in Land Rovers and 3-tonners driving towards Lagos. I checked my time, it was 1:15 in the afternoon. I recall that about 14 hours before, 5 majors were gathered to start this action. Now only 2 of us were together. The remainder had vanished from our sights. Since 3:30 in the night, this has to say only 4 hours after we started and only 1.5 since the H hour when our action actually began. We had lost Ifeajuna and Okafor, both of whom were our only sources of troops, weapon, communication and confidence. If we did not have these two in the first place, in the view of the strategic post that they were holding, we would not have started at all. Now we were left in the lurch. Chukwuka too had not joined up with us and Obienu did not report with his troops. We had lost valuable time seeking for those things that should have been made available to us, which were previously believed were available to us. We had lost troops, ground and time. Now we have also lost Lagos to Ironsi. What a terrible situation. We drove on through Shagamu to Djibouti. The erstwhile rioters of that area were still surging towards the road in hundreds and in vain ferrets. It was 3:45 in the afternoon. We stopped at the first petrol station to refuel. 4 o'clock met us at the petrol station and the radio was turned aloud therein. Then a dreadful announcement was made. There has been a mutiny by a dissident section of the Nigerian army this morning. The Prime Minister, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, and the Federal Minister of Finance, Chief Festus Okoti Ebo, were apprehended and taken to an unknown destination. As soon as the squadron subaltern heard this announcement, he felt horrified. He summoned the drivers of the ferrets and without saying a word to either Anoforo or me, led the 4 ferrets away towards Lagos. Anoforo was the first to observe this. He rushed out of the station, commandeered the first available car and pursued the ferrets. He soon overtook them and tried to halt the leading ferret commanded by the subaltern, but the young officer used the ferrets to damage his car. He cocked his gun and pointed it towards Anoforo, ready to shoot, so the latter allowed him to go. After that, Anoforo commandeered another vehicle and drove back to the petrol station where I was waiting. With the loss of the ferrets, our Lagos operations of January 15 came to an abrupt end. We could no longer return to Lagos, and with the recent radio announcement, the possibility of getting troops in Enugu had vanished. There was no news from the other capitals. The announcement did not indicate what had happened in Enugu, Benin, Ibadan and Kaduna. The only course to us was to continue the journey to Benin and Enugu. If our troops had acted in those places, it would be easy for us to contact Kaduna. So agreeing, Anoforo and I continued our journey using civilian vehicles.